Everybody, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us on the radio, on the internet, as far as YouTube, as one of the podcasts, we appreciate that. Please like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, whatever you can do to get this out. We interview amazing people that are doing amazing things. This is Laura Moulton, and she does teach at Lewis and Clark College. And she did start back in 2011. It's Streetbooks. It's a bicycle-powered mobile library that serves people who live outside the margins. And she's serving a lot of people that are houseless. And I think that's amazing because, we have saw throughout 2020, but even before that, a lot of people are down on their luck, not because they want to be, because they've lost their job, because they've lost their house. And this is even going to get worse now because of the eviction moratorium, which we've done a show on last week. And we've talked about that. So it's really incredibly sad what a lot of people in this country are going through. But we're going to uplift this conversation with some fun stuff and really the amazing work that Laura is doing. So instead of me rattling on, I'm going to say, Laura, thanks so much for your time today. And you're doing amazing work. And thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
All right. So first, can you tell the viewers a little bit about you? I know I kind of gave the nits and crannies that, you do teach at Lewis and Clark, but besides that, just the general what you do.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it. As you mentioned, I am a teacher. I teach at Lewis and Clark College. I also teach writing workshops at the high school level here in Portland for an organization called Literary Arts, which is a really great place in Portland. But in about 2000, I would say 7 or 8, I started making sort of participatory art projects that involved the community and often the city. And as you mentioned, I founded Streetbooks in 2011. It was initially an art project. It was supposed to last for 3 months, but I bonded with these patrons that were coming each week. And I remember late that season, I had a guy that was a veteran who was staying up in Forest Park. He was coming weekly to get books. And when he came and got some new ones and returned the old ones, he said, "See you next week." And I was struck by my predicament, which I had, I'd set up this service basically in this community and made these friends, and I couldn't imagine just leaving. And so that sort of sparked the beginning of the Street Library. And it's amazing to me that it's been going more than 10 years. Like, I never saw that coming, but I think, as you know, cities on the West Coast are really struggling with numbers of people who are just outside or living in a car or couch surfing. And so sadly, there's been plenty of, patronage over time. And it's really, hitting a crisis point right now because of the pandemic. So that's kind of the backstory on Streetbooks.
Can you just kind of give the audience that hasn't been to that part of the country, a little bit of a perspective of what is really going on with these people?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, Portland is a welcoming place. And a lot of my patrons have joked, those who are living outdoors, they say you have to kind of work hard to starve in Portland, Oregon, because there are so many resources for people who are struggling. And those of course are also struggling now under the pandemic. But I think the key issue facing Portland and facing a lot of cities is there is not affordable housing for people. And that has been, over time, Portland, was celebrated in the Portlandia show. But that did not feature real life Portland, of course. And what that sort of highlighted was a small section of, that was a joke show anyway. But over time, we have developed as a city in a way that does not take care of everyone. And so that I've seen a guy that looks scruffy and stereotypically, outdoors, standing next to a woman with a rolling suitcase that is very carefully put together and also living on the street. I mean, there's no one profile of someone who has found themselves outside. And I think right now in Portland, we are seeing a lot of people struggling with mental health. And that's very distressing because they're the most vulnerable people you see. And that is hard, So I think the pandemic has definitely exacerbated all kinds of stuff, but the main key problem is there is not affordable housing for people, And so that, I think that is the most overwhelming need and problem right now in Portland.
Well, I'll go to this before we get into the next topic. We live in the richest country in the world, and the people that listen to this know where I'm going with this. We just had we just got out of a war in Afghanistan. We do have still troops in the Middle East as far as Iraq. We spend trillions of dollars on these wars. We should have brought this money home instead of starting wars. And like you said, Laura, started this affordable housing a long, long time ago. No one should be homeless in this country. No one should lack health care, and the list goes on and on. It's just a travesty that, we do live in the richest country in the world, and we're letting our people, whether it's regular people, our veterans, just live and die on the streets due to, lack of health care or lack of a home in general. So
Yeah.
it's really a joke. So,
yeah. Well, and I would like to just say one thing, add something here, and that is, you mentioned veterans, and this is a very exciting bit of news for Streetbooks. I just finished and published a book with a fellow former he's a street librarian now, but a former patron who I met when he was living outside in Old Town, downtown Portland. His name is Ben. And over time, we stayed in touch, and he got back indoors and kind of got his life more stable. And so we wrote this book together. It's called Loners, The Making of a Street Library. We're super proud of it. But I think that Ben makes really good points in this book, and he writes from the perspective of discovering himself outside, looking around for options, encountering this weird woman with this library bike. What is that? And, and then there's some funny parts where he busts my chops because I don't have PG Wodehouse on the bike. But one of the cases that he makes is he's a veteran. He's 67 years old right now.
wow.
And when he landed outdoors, he stopped drinking. He wasn't abusing any substances. It was such a shock to the system that he was kind of reeling from that. And I think the stereotype is you see someone who is sitting there grimy, and there's a whole story we tell ourselves, but a lot of the time it's not, even close to right. And so I think we those of us who are housed and who have means and a car to drive and that kind of stuff, I think we are almost required to tell a story about the people who are winding up outside because it's so distressing, right? And it's so often just not reality. So that's one thing I'm thinking about a lot.
Let's talk about the book. So since we're on that topic and you described that, so as far as the book goes, when did you get that idea to do the book? How did it come about?
Well, yeah, I am a writer, and
Right.
I have written for years, and I think that I thought about how to capture the story of our patrons and the story of the street. And I was very wary of the idea of going in and appropriating anyone's story and, or taking advantage of someone else's, worst day of their life sort of thing. And so for a long time, I stayed away from that. I didn't feel like I could capture that without sort of putting people at risk. And then as I worked with Ben, who we call Hodge, his name is Ben Hodgson. As I worked with him over time, we started to meet at a cafe while he was still living outside. And we brainstormed, we had different ideas. I wrote a grant that would have been a project we worked together. I didn't get it. That was no problem. But then we began to talk about what it would be like to capture his words and his story and his perspective, and also blend it with what I was doing and with the street library. And I wrote another grant, and that one we got. There's a great organization in Portland called Regional Arts and Culture Council, and they funded it. So they funded kind of a literary project. And so then we had a little bit of money to meet once a week together, go through what we had already. Hodge was better at writing at his house than sitting and generating work on the page. And so sometimes he'd bring pages. I'd go through them. I have a busy life. I have 2 kids. My husband is a writer as well, and we have, we've cobbled together paying jobs mixed with artistic jobs, and so it took a while. I think we started that in like 2014 or 15 and worked on it over time. And I think the pandemic made it suddenly, the editor that we were getting together with and getting support from, that those in-person meetings stopped, time passed. And then we connected with a really cool local publisher in Portland, Michael Heald from Perfect Day Press. And that we've just been going ever since. That just clicked in such a cool way. And he's been a great collaborator. But it really is a beautiful object. I'm so proud of it because it has art that reflect the cityscapes that were part of Hodge's experience outside. The artist that we worked with, Aaron, his name is Aaron Robert Miller. He listened to us, he read the book, he took his sketchbook and biked to these places in Portland and made notes and sketches. And so the art is beautiful in the book as well. One of the very coolest things about the book is that it's available for people to order, but they can order a second copy and donate it for a patron, because we want all of the copies on the bike libraries to be free for patrons. And so that's pretty cool, just to be able to come full circle and have the story of this library available for the people that are coming to us, All
right. Again, for people that are listening, this is Laura Moulton, again, from Streetbooks. Definitely check it out. And as we keep moving in, we're going to keep talking about the story. So, I told you, and I told everybody, I guess I should say, everybody at the beginning of the interview, that this street book started in 2011. How has it really grown since 2011?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the biggest thing is that first summer I was kind of by myself. I started out solo. I had a couple volunteers join, and that was great because that kind of got us through that first season. And then I think I thought about what could this be? What even was this? I have no nonprofit managerial experience or history. It was an art project, as I said, but slowly people began to come, and I brought on some people the next season to be librarians. People came to volunteer their various expertise, and that became the first kind of initial board of directors. And Hodge joined the board of directors. And so we've tried over time to have both our librarians and our board of directors reflect our patrons, so that people have lived experience out on the streets. Maybe they've struggled with mental health or with addiction, and they bring that perspective to the work, which is super helpful. And so just, I would say over time, we have grown our staff. We have a core admin staff now of about 4 people, and then librarians and board of directors. So it's a kind of bona fide, it's not like fabulously wealthy, which for a street library, you'd wonder about if we did get fabulously wealthy, you'd be a little skeptical, right? Are we really doing the work,
Well, first of all, I got to ask you this question next. I saw some videos of you pedaling all the books around. I'm a bike rider myself, and, I do 10 to 15 miles when I ride, but geez, I'm not pedaling books all around in a cart. So you must either have legs of steel, or I don't know, you got some kind of special talent to do that. How does all that work, first of all?
Yeah, well, we do, I can't claim like that. Biking the books has kept me pretty fit, but I would say we have like a librarian, Diana Rempe, who's an incredible cargo bike rider, and she's very unfazed about biking clear across town and schlepping books. Wow. She's amazing. She's kind of my hero. So if we have long haul trips, we lean on Diana. But I would say we've been strategic. Like, we have an old classic bike that my brother helped me build. That's just a Haley tricycle, square box, and we carry 40 to 50 titles. We try to stick to paperbacks because of the weight and size. And we're strategic about where that bike serves. So that does mostly downtown, old town, flatter, less hilly areas. And then then we have St. John's and we have Southeast and different spots that that some of the other bike is better at kind of negotiating. And I would say also, I work a library shift at our headquarters. We have a really nice little office inside an affordable housing complex at St. Francis Park, it's called, which is great because we serve the residents who live there. We have an on-site library. And then we also, I can go from there and deliver books. And so there are several encampments that have come up as kind of an emergency measure when the pandemic hit. And that's a community of people living together. They have their own tiny little houses in each of those spaces. And I take requests from them each week and deliver books. And so, that's another example of something that Streetbooks does.
It's truly incredible because I've rode those bikes, like you said, that don't go well up hills, and I don't know, I couldn't do it.
Yeah,
I couldn't do it, so I get it.
Well, and I have to say, it was easier in 2011 when I was going up hills than it is now in 2021, especially after the pandemic. But after it, if we're at the tail end, if we're at the fourth wave, fifth wave, who knows? But yeah, so it's funny time. We've joked about the need to hire librarians in their 20s now, because some of us are, pushing 50. So
I get you. So, we go into this and you have talked about, obviously the veteran that wrote the book with you, and you went in depth about him. But so can you talk to the viewers a little bit about some of these other people that you've met throughout working with Streetbooks? Because again, it is that conception of you when you see someone on the street. My thing is, and we're all judgmental in all different ways, but you've got to try to look at the person and say, maybe they've had a struggle in their life that you can't see on the outside. And you can't just look at somebody on the street and say they're a bum, they're a loser. You got to also think of, what struggles have they went through? Maybe they've went through similar struggles to me. Maybe they've went through worse struggles. So can you talk about some of these people that have went through struggle, and maybe they're doing better, maybe they're, still doing the same, but regardless?
Yeah, I think, it's been such a cool experience and such a privilege to get to know people that I would not really have had access to otherwise. And books have been the bridge and the reason that we can stand comfortably together and just talk. And it's not them having to go in and show documentation to try to get some kind of service. It's very low key and it's a very friendly environment that we try to create. And I think to that end, over time, I've met really brilliant people. Some of them struggle with mental health. And, once in a while I'll be in a conversation with someone and it seems utterly sane. And like in my, realm, I understand them and they might say something suddenly and I realize, okay, this is more complicated than I realized. But it's very interesting because I think that the vast majority of people I encounter would like to have a place to tuck away. They would like to have a house, to have an apartment, to be a part of a community that's safe. And I have very rarely encountered kids, younger types often, that were heading to hop a train and we're reading Jack Kerouac and we're just on a marvelous adventure. And I think there is that, I've met people who were kind of outside by choice and wanted to live very small on the earth, but that is rare. I would say the vast majority of people have had several things go out from under them, have had medical debt because of health stuff. They've had someone take advantage of them because they weren't savvy with a mortgage and with refinance and that sort of thing. So I think there are so many factors that lead to people outside in the first place. But I would say, I think of a woman named Carrie who lives in a tent with her husband. In the past year, over pandemic time, he had a stroke, if you can imagine. He went to the hospital, he got treatment, and then he was released back out to the tent. And she all along was just scrapping for him. She was making calls. but her phone had a limit on minutes. It's enormously challenging for people. And again, like you say, we can't assume that we know anyone's story. And so I think that many times we've had just such a great faithful patronage from people who are really glad to come once a week to hang out with us, to get a hit of that community, the conversation about books. It's very exciting to have a patron make an order for like, I need the third Harry Potter or I'm gonna lose my shit, right? And the next week they're there and it's so exciting to say, hey, I've got your book. And so those matches are so meaningful. They know that we know their name. They know that we have thought about them all week and that we made this delivery, So I think that is part of the magic of the street library. And I also I tell the story sometimes of a guy named Ray who was at an encampment where he lived and was a heck of a reader. And he fell into conversation with a passerby that was kind of like, what is this project? And pretty soon they were having this in-depth conversation about a book they had just read. And I could just overhear their conversation. I thought, this is like a college class. This is like people sitting and critiquing what they've read. It's unlike anything people would assume as they drive past and look. And so, that's what the power of Streetbooks, I think, is gathering people, really knowing people, knowing their names, greeting them by name, not being put off if somebody's not very buttoned up or showered, because they have done what they could with, their circumstances and their belongings and all of the limitations. But it's just been a very rich community that has sprung up, and our patrons are, it's a very humbling thing how much our patrons are a part of this project. We couldn't run a street library if people weren't willing to set aside whatever pressing life things they have for the day and come talk to us, and order a book.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. People that are listening, again, this is Laura Moulton. She teaches at Lewis and Clark, and she did start in 2011 Streetbooks. Definitely check that out. How did COVID affect you, and is it still affecting Streetbooks?
Yeah, I would say initially it was a very spooky thing. It was just we didn't know exactly what we could do to protect ourselves, how operations might go forward. And we had to suspend last summer our usual shifts outside because we just didn't feel like we could keep people safe who gathered. And we didn't want to create a spot where people would be vulnerable and potentially pass something. And so we decided to switch it up, and just the librarians that were willing to, this was pre-vaccination last, spring and early summer, those who were willing to go out and stay masked and be outside, but kind of take that risk, continued running, running library shifts. And that meant instead of bringing the bike out and having everybody gather, we went one-to-one and just approached people kind of at a distance. We had a smaller little box of books or bag of books that we would take with us. So it was a lot more footwork and a lot more one-to-one. We offered hand sanitizer. We distributed masks.
Wow.
We passed on COVID relief information from the city and the county. Sometimes they will route stuff through us because they know that we have that connection with folks out on the streets. And so I would say we had to winnow it down to just a one-to-one careful distance effort for a while. And we're still there. We're running pretty regular shifts. We're a little bit leaner, a little bit, at the end of a full year and a half, short a couple of librarians. And we've had to, run a little bit of a leaner force. But I think that we've largely been able to stay masked and distanced. And this summer we rolled the libraries back out. We had kind of a slow open in June, and we've been setting up. And if people don't have masks, we offer them, during the shift. So I'd say it's impacted us. We've been able to keep going, and it was notable that everything shut down in cities. And in Portland, what that meant was all community centers, all dining halls where people would go at least to get one meal and be able to sit down. Multnomah County Library, which is an incredible library system, all of their buildings were closed. And so suddenly all indoor spaces that might have, offered a respite just for an hour or a couple hours for people who were always outside, suddenly they were so much more exposed. And we've got, a year and a half of that. And that's been really intense, for our library patrons. And I feel like, Diana would say, hey, we're the only library in the state of Oregon right now, running. I mean, the only one that was, and that's not true to say there was an online system where you could put a hold, you could go and pick this up at the window, but that was not accessible to the majority of our library patrons. So yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting challenge, but it's also made the exchanges and the gestures of kindness like all the more important during that time,
So the last few questions I want to get into, Laura, is, because we didn't really talk about this yet, about, what books you carry, where do you get the books? I assume most of them are donated. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's been very cool. We began early, for some years, we did a card and pocket system, which was very old school. And people always, anybody our age would be like, oh my gosh, I love the card and pocket. They remember that from their own libraries. And so that was kind of the system. People would choose the book that they wanted. They'd write their name on the card. So they left us the card and they took the book. And that was handy because we could track generally what had gone out that shift and kind of count, count how many books and track what went out. Under the pandemic, we've decreased the number of things we're handling and having people, sign. And the average sort of exchange looks like someone saying, hey, I'd like that Ray Bradbury book, us giving it to them and saying, great, enjoy, we'll be here next week, same time, same place. If you want to come back and exchange it for something else, if we don't cross paths for some reason, please pass it on to someone who will enjoy it. And we've had patrons who were very loyal and very insistent that they get those books back each week.
That's great.
I had one patron in his upper 70s named Fred, who, when I suggested, hey, Fred, if it ever stresses you out or it's inconvenient to get back here when I'm here, don't worry, like you could pass those books on. And he was almost kind of offended. Like he was a real Janet Ivanovich fan. And he was like, no, I'll be here. And so I think that we've seen a range of things, but our system over time has evolved to just really encourage people to enjoy the books and not worry. So often they're like, well, it's getting rainy. I don't know if I can keep this in good condition. And of course, books on the street are going to have harder wear and tear, To answer your question, we are so lucky to live in a city like Portland that's full of readers. There are tons of books that are donated. We get a lot of great offers all the time. And we have a range of books like Louis L'Amour, Alice Walker. I mean, it's a very diverse offering. We try to have a real diverse showing, both literary and maybe more pulpy murder mystery, more books by people of color and about people of color. I mean, we try to have people be able to see themselves reflected back. And that's one thing. There's a story Diana tells about a woman coming past who kind of did a double take and said, well, I didn't think I'd see myself on this library. And it was an Alice Walker book, And so I think we really try to make sure there's a diverse range of offerings for our patrons. Yeah.
So I know you have 3 locations, correct, in Portland?
Well, we have one main headquarters where our books and library is based. And then we actually, we have a number of shifts that we do all over the city. Yeah. And those are usually about 8 shifts a week. But that sort of expands and contracts according to pandemic recommendations and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So would you ever try to, and I know this is probably tough, especially with the pandemic still going on, but would you ever try to do something national? Obviously, like maybe start like chapters in different cities, maybe even if it's in just Oregon, or maybe if it's in other states.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's exciting to be able to say that we have a sister library. We have
Oh,
a
okay.
Streetbooks ATX in Austin, Texas.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
and that was started by a guy named Patrick Crowley, who wanted to mark 20 years of sobriety by doing some gesture back to the community with a mind toward rough times he'd had, and an awareness of people looking out for him. And so he's done really well. He's been in Austin. We were able to go there a few years ago. A group of us was sort of a librarian contingency, and have our first summit, International Street Library Summit. It was just us and Patrick, but it was pretty cool. And we are definitely interested, that the feature that we had on Streetbooks in the AARP magazine this summer resulted in people writing letters of support, sending checks sometimes, which was amazing. Right. And also expressing an interest in seeing something similar in their own cities. And so that's something we're building right now, a kind of Zoom Q&A to maybe launch people or to give people the resources. And I will say that the exciting part about this book that we have coming out is there's a how-to guide that has our best ideas and our best, recommendations for starting a library in people's own city. So I hope people will take advantage of that. Yeah.
So as we go with the last question, again, Laura Moulton here on Fire Breathing Rob, Streetbooks. So Laura, what advice would you give to the millennials listening that, maybe really like what you're doing? I know we talked about, and I should say you just spoke about starting it in different cities as far as Streetbooks go, but what advice would you give to them?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would start with that idea that I would recommend people approach their block and their neighborhood with some curiosity. If they feel like they know what a person's story is, there's a possibility that they don't. And a lot of times a greeting and just eye contact can go a long way. I think offering a book is a brilliant way to start a conversation. How's it going? Are you reading any books? Because I could get you some books if you need. Things like that. And I think I am mindful right now of how amplified the streets are and how amplified we are in this country, and how, I'm seeing, and this is Portland, I'm sure that you're seeing similar things here and there, drivers kind of crazy at the wheel, and a lot of it just feels kind of harsh sometimes out there. And so I would caution people to always be safe and be mindful of their surroundings. If they've passed by an encampment or a person sitting, and they want to greet them in a friendly way, that's great. But I would say give people space. That's one thing that with Streetbooks, I was always conscious of giving people plenty of space. I didn't want to show up and say, hello, I'm a housed person, come to make your day and save your life and offer you a book. It was nothing like that. And in fact, it was like, if we respect one another as individuals, of course, we're going to give people space and not assume that they should have to talk to us, right? And so that is a balance, I think, I really want to emphasize. But I think approaching with kindness, with curiosity, considering offering something like books to a community if you see somebody in need, those can go a long way. And it can be small. It doesn't have to be a weekly thing where you have a staff. It can be an individual with a bag of 10 of their favorite books, and you can set off, and it's amazing the conversations you'll have and the community you'll be able to create.
Laura Moulton here on Fire Breathing Rob. Again, Streetbooks. Laura, as we end the interview, can you tell people where they can find the book that you just put out? Also find more about Streetbooks in general?
Yeah, thank you for that. They can go to streetbooks.org, Streetbooks, all one word. Streetbooks.org /loners is our book. It's LOANERS, Loners. And yeah, it's available now. It's so exciting. We're shipping them out today and tomorrow. So yeah, thanks
All
again
right.
for having me, Rob. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries, Laura. Thanks so much for coming. I appreciate it also.